It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in Brookford, a mid-sized city where the streets hummed with the restless rhythm of daily life. Clouds hung low, heavy with the scent of rain, as Angela Porter eased her car into the lot of a neighborhood grocery store. She was dressed simply, dark slacks, a cream blouse, hair neatly tied back. Nothing about her appearance hinted at the weight she carried, the years of study, the long nights of trial preparation, the countless hours spent in courtrooms fighting for the rights of others. Angela was a senior attorney with the state's Office of Civil Rights. She had prosecuted cases involving police misconduct, discriminatory housing practices, and wrongful firings. But that afternoon, she wasn't in a courtroom. She was running errands, mentally reviewing her grocery list as she stepped out of her car. She didn't see the cruiser pull in behind her until the driver's door slammed shut. A tall man in uniform approached, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on her like she had already been tried and found guilty. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle," he barked. Confused, Angela froze. "Is there a problem, officer?" He didn't answer. His hand rested on the butt of his holstered gun, not in a full draw, but enough to let her know who had the power here. His voice sharpened. "I said step away from the vehicle. Hands where I can see them." Around them, a few shoppers slowed, eyes darting between the officer and the woman in the cream blouse. Angela complied, lifting her hands slightly. Her heart began to pound, not in guilt, but in recognition. She had stood in courtrooms with men just like him. She had heard the cold authority in their voices, seen the same tightness in their stance. "What's this about?" she asked again. "Your car matches the description of a vehicle involved in a theft earlier today," he replied. His words were clipped, mechanical, almost rehearsed. "I need to see your ID." Angela nodded calmly, reaching into her purse. "It's in my wallet." Slowly, he interrupted, moving closer. She handed over her driver's license. The officer barely glanced at it before ordering her to turn around and place her hands on the hood of her car. The cold steel beneath her palms bit into her skin as she felt the sharp click of metal around her wrists. Gasps from nearby onlookers cut through the air. Angela's pulse raced, not from fear of guilt, but from the jarring realization of what was happening. She was being arrested, in broad daylight, without cause. "Officer, I'm an attorney with the state's Office of Civil Rights," she said firmly. "You're making a serious mistake." His jaw tightened. "You can tell that to the judge." In that moment, the rain began to fall, fat, cold drops splattering against the pavement. Angela felt them slide down her face, mixing with the heat of humiliation burning in her cheeks. She thought of her parents, who had taught her to always speak respectfully to law enforcement, even when wronged. She thought of the young black men and women she had defended in court, whose voices trembled as they recounted their own encounters like this one. She was living the very injustice she fought against. The officer guided, no, pushed, her toward his cruiser. The onlookers whispered, their voices a mix of sympathy, shock, and that familiar undercurrent of resignation. In the back seat of the cruiser, the world felt muffled. Angela's mind raced through her legal training. She noted every detail, the time, the weather, the number of witnesses, the lack of explanation. She knew exactly how this would look in court, and she also knew how often cases like this never made it that far. The drive to the precinct was short but heavy. Through the partition, she watched the officer's face in the rearview mirror. There was no flicker of doubt there, no moment of reconsideration. Inside the station, the process was mechanical, name, fingerprints, mugshot. She stood in the holding room, her wrist sore from the cuffs, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glare on the peeling paint. "Do you know who I am?" she asked one of the booking officers, her tone controlled but edged with steel. He shrugged without looking at her. "Another suspect." Angela bit back a bitter laugh. Another suspect. That was all she was to them in that moment, not an attorney, not a daughter, not a professional who had spent her career upholding the law. It wasn't until nearly an hour later that things shifted. A desk sergeant walked briskly toward the holding room, holding a file in one hand and Angela's ID in the other. His eyes darted between the papers in her face. "You're Angela Porter." "Yes," she replied evenly. "The state attorney." "Yes." The sergeant's face drained of color. He looked over his shoulder at the arresting officer, whose confident stance now faltered. Whispered words passed between them, fragments of sentences about mistake, and verification, and release paperwork. Angela said nothing. She didn't need to. The silence pressed harder than any accusation she could make. When the cuffs came off, the officer avoided her eyes. No apology, no acknowledgement, just the cold formality of procedure being reversed. Angela stepped out into the rain again, the parking lot now nearly empty. She could have gone home, dried off, tried to put the incident behind her. But as she stood there, the weight of what had happened settled into her bones. This wasn't about her pride or her inconvenience. This was about the truth that no title, no degree, no professional standing could shield a black woman from the assumptions, the suspicion, the ready hand of a corrupt badge. And she wasn't going to let it pass quietly. Angela didn't go home that night. She went to her office. The rain had stopped by the time she arrived, but her clothes were still damp, the chill lingering on her skin. She sat at her desk in silence for a long moment, staring at the framed certificates on the wall. Her law degree, her admission to the state bar, commendations for public service. Symbols of years of work, now standing in stark contrast to the way she had been treated hours earlier. She opened her laptop and began typing. Not a diary entry, not a letter of complaint, a legal declaration. She wrote with precision, each sentence a carefully constructed blade. The timeline, the physical handling, the lack of probable cause, the violation of constitutional rights, all detailed with the meticulous clarity of someone who had spent her life dissecting cases just like this one. By midnight, she had 3 things: a sworn statement, a list of witnesses who had been present in that grocery store parking lot, and the officer's full badge number. She wasn't just going to file a complaint. She was going to file a lawsuit. The next morning, the story began to spread. First, it was whispered through the courthouse hallways. Then it appeared in a small local blog known for covering social justice issues. By the end of the day, a major regional newspaper had published a headline that read, "State Civil Rights Attorney Arrested Without Cause by Brookford Police Officer." With every share, every retweet, the city's mood shifted. People were angry. Not just because it had happened to a respected lawyer, but because it confirmed what so many had been saying for years, that authority, unchecked, would act without accountability. Angela received dozens of messages from people, some she knew, most she didn't, telling her their own stories. Each one was a wound, another reminder that what she had endured was not an isolated incident. When the Brookford Police Department issued a short press release calling it an unfortunate misunderstanding, Angela knew exactly how to respond. She scheduled a press conference. The morning of the conference, the steps of the courthouse were crowded. Cameras, reporters, community activists, and everyday citizens gathered in anticipation. Angela stepped up to the microphone, not in the cream blouse she had worn that day, but in a sharp navy suit. She looked out over the crowd and began to speak. "My name is Angela Porter. I am an attorney with the state's Office of Civil Rights. 3 days ago, I was handcuffed, arrested, and detained without cause while running errands in my own community. I was accused of theft without evidence, treated as a suspect without probable cause, and denied the dignity and respect that every citizen deserves under the law." She paused, letting the words sink in. Cameras clicked. "I have spent my career defending those whose voices are ignored. But I want you to hear me clearly, this is not about me. This is about a system in which the color of your skin can outweigh the content of your character, your achievements, or your position. This is about the abuse of authority. This is about the dangerous belief that a badge is a license to intimidate without accountability." Her voice didn't waver. She spoke not with anger, but with conviction, each sentence steady as stone. "I am filing a federal lawsuit against the officer involved, the Brookford Police Department, and the city. I am doing this not only to hold them accountable for what they did to me, but to ensure that every black man, woman, and child in this city knows they have the right to dignity, to fairness, and to justice. This will not be swept under the rug." The crowd erupted in applause. Some raised fists. Others wiped away tears. Angela stepped back from the microphone, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It belonged to everyone who had been stopped, searched, arrested, or harassed without cause. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal filings, media appearances, and community meetings. The officer's personnel file, once sealed, came to light in court. It revealed a pattern of complaints: excessive force, racial profiling, unprofessional conduct. None had resulted in serious disciplinary action. Until now. Under mounting pressure, the city announced his suspension without pay pending the outcome of the investigation. But Angela wasn't done. She used her platform to push for a broader police oversight bill in the state legislature. The proposed law would require independent civilian review boards to investigate allegations of misconduct, mandate the release of body camera footage within 7 days of an incident, and enforce stricter consequences for proven violations. Her determination drew both praise and resistance. Police unions accused her of politicizing the incident. Anonymous letters and late-night phone calls tried to intimidate her into silence. But Angela had weathered tougher storms in the courtroom, and she refused to back down. 6 months later, the case reached its conclusion. The city settled the lawsuit for a substantial sum, part of which Angela donated to a legal defense fund for victims of police misconduct. The officer resigned from the force under public pressure. In the oversight bill, it passed. Narrowly, but it passed. On the day the governor signed it into law, Angela stood in the front row of the crowd, her heart steady. She thought back to that moment in the parking lot, the cold cuffs biting into her wrists, the humiliation of being paraded into the station. It would have been easy to let that day define her as a victim. But she had chosen differently. She had chosen to make it a beginning, not an ending. That evening, she returned to the same grocery store. She parked in the same spot. The sun was setting, painting the sky with streaks of gold and deep purple. As she walked inside, a woman she didn't know approached her. "You're the lawyer from the news, right?" the woman asked. Angela smiled softly. "Yes, I am." The woman nodded, her eyes glistening. "Thank you. For all of us." Angela went about her errands, the familiar sound of shopping carts rattling against the tile. But this time, she wasn't just another woman picking up groceries. She was a reminder, to the community, to the city, and maybe even to herself, that dignity could be defended, that justice could be demanded, and that sometimes the most ordinary days can ignite the most extraordinary fights.